welcome to 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. I'm your host, Rachel Vogel, and joining us for tonight's episode is Jason Lipshutz, Executive Director of Music at Billboard. Ever wondered who's the writer behind all your favorite articles? Well, chances are Jason's behind at least a handful of them. He's written about music for over a decade and penned cover stories on Taylor Swift, U2, Shawn Mendes, Lorde, Iver, Blink-182, and many other iconic artists. He's been featured on popular broadcast programs like Access Hollywood, Good Morning America, Today, and Entertainment Tonight. And he was formerly the deputy editor of digital at Fuse Media, where he contributed to The Hollywood Reporter, Spinner, Popjustice, and Vibe. Jason, I'm very excited to have you join us. How are you?
I'm good, Rachel. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. Can't complain. So we're going to start right away. Are you ready for the first question?
Let's rock and roll.
Imagine for a second you're sitting down with your 25-year-old self. What one piece of advice would you give him on a personal note? And what one piece of advice would you give him from a business perspective?
So this is a little bit cheating because I have the same piece of advice for myself personally and professionally, which is just be patient. Because, I think on a personal level, when I was 25, I was living in New York City. I was writing for Billboard. I was, excited about everything about my circumstances and my life. But I also was really ambitious and I wanted to write more cover stories and I wanted to do more things on video and I wanted to start podcasts and I appreciated that ambition in the sense of looking back on it now. But, I think that I would have told myself to appreciate everything going on around me and be patient in terms of those different opportunities. And, I'm focusing more on a professional note, but I think also on a personal note, I've learned as I've gotten older that everybody is insecure about what they're doing and everyone is going through something that you're not fully aware of. And sometimes people mess up. And I've spent a lot of my, early career frustrated by people that didn't get back to me or annoyed with someone who wasn't editing me quick enough or replying to my emails quickly enough. And, it wasn't actually like an anger. It was just more of like, I was like, go, go, go. I'm 25. I'm single. I'm living in the city. Come on, we can move at a fast pace. This is now that I'm 34, living with my wife and my dog in the suburbs, I have a very different perspective and understand that, sometimes a work email or an assignment or an edit has to go on the back burner for real life. And, that's really what I would tell myself. If I took a time machine back to 25, I would just say, be patient in the opportunities you get and be patient with the people around you. I've been very, very fortunate to work with a lot of incredibly kind and supportive people. And honestly, people that I never should have gotten annoyed at ever. Not that I'm embellishing a little bit in the sense of like, it was less about being frustrated with them and more about just like the pace I was living at.
Right.
But yeah, I think, everybody is kind of going through something outside of the little tiny space in which we see them. And I have much more awareness of that now. And that's what I would tell myself.
That's great advice. I think that's very relatable as somebody who's in their young 20s.
Yeah.
So you mentioned being 25 and writing like your cover stories and everything. So I have to ask, what was the feeling when you got your very first story published?
I mean, it was amazing. This was when I was an intern at Billboard and I was still in college. And
wow.
I remember getting my first print story, which was just like a small profile on a band that no one's ever heard of. And yeah, I mean, just everything since then, every new milestone. I mean, I still get such a rush when a big story comes out. And it's why I love to do what I do. Like I love to, writing has always kind of been my North Star. And I have really loved developing different skill sets over the course of my career, from editing to managing to, media and multimedia and, just even administrative stuff. Like I've appreciated it all, but writing is still my passion. And, there's nothing like getting a story published and seeing your byline. And, it's still like, it still is something that I really try, even though I'm literally writing every single day for Billboard. I definitely try not to take it for granted.
Mm-hmm. Nice. Well, I'll definitely keep a lookout for your name.
Every single day. It's on there.
Every day.
It's on Billboard.com. Yep.
All right. All right. With that, we're going to move right to question 2. Every industry has its dirty little secrets, and you and I both know that it's no different in the music industry. And sometimes people think that that's a bad thing, but that's not always the case. Sometimes they can be good. What's one secret you would like to share with our listeners about the industry?
So I was thinking about this in the sense of where I was when entering the music industry from a mental standpoint, and just from my attitude. And the thing I would tell my younger self entering the industry, or anyone listening who's entering the music industry, is that everybody's taste sucks sometimes. And
that's true.
what I mean by that is, like, there's such an imposter syndrome when you're entering the music industry, because you're entering this industry with legends who have produced some of the biggest hits of all time, and label execs who are behind some of the biggest artists in the world, and writers who have covered the biggest stories in music over the course of decades. And that's very daunting. That's a thing that is kind of hard to wrap your head around, especially when you're starting. But I think one thing that I wish someone had kind of told me early on was that, no one has perfect taste. Obviously, you gravitate toward some people's, when you're thinking about critics, when you're thinking about labels who have a lot of bands who sound you like, there are certain people and components of the industry that you gravitate toward naturally. But I remember just like thinking about how mind-blowing it was when someone liked something a little bit outside the box. Like, it was almost like an emperor has no clothes kind of deal. When I was like, wait, you
right.
like this song? You like this album? I think especially back then, this was pre-Spotify, everyone's music tastes were a little bit more regimented, where, it was rare for someone to really love pop music and also really love country and really love hip hop. And so you had much more like kind of specialists, where there were indie rock writers and there were rap writers, and same with execs, and same with, people at different companies within the music industry. But yeah, everybody's taste sucks sometimes. Like, there are the biggest labels in the world who I've seen say, this thing, I love it so much, it's going to be enormous, you have to listen to this artist. And they're not good, and they don't go anywhere. And that happens. Like, no one has a perfect batting average. And because of that, I was talking about, insecurity. I think if people entering the music industry knew that, then they'd be a little bit more comfortable in their own skin. Where, I remember, I have a very distinct memory of telling, and I must have been like 22, 23 at the time, telling an older editor that one of my favorite songs of the past, this was mid 2000s, was Cranked At by Soulja Boy. And I was like, this song is genius, and I love it. And they were just so shocked, because back then I was like the indie rock guy. I was writing about Animal Collective and Frog Eyes and Wolf Parade. And I was like, no, I love Cranked At Soulja Boy. And, I definitely was like a little bit wobbly in that declaration, but yeah, I think it's a little bit more wide open now. But I would also say, like, in terms of the stuff you listen to, the stuff that you want to write about, the stuff that you co-sign, if you're not on the editorial standpoint, but are working at a label or a management company, yeah, like don't be afraid to to speak up because nobody has perfect taste. And
Hmm.
it's something that like, because you go into the industry and you think everybody has perfect taste and you're like, everybody knows more than I do.
Hmm.
And everybody has developed their palate more than I have. And that's just not necessarily true. So that's what that would be my kind of dirty little secret about the music industry, is that like people are wrong. People have wild opinions. People are, you know, in love with bands that that you hate, and that's like totally fine. And it's vice versa. So yeah,
Definitely.
roll with it.
That's great. I love that answer. All right, so we're at the third and final question.
Here we go.
Throughout your career, I can only imagine you've been asked a lot of questions, whether for an industry conference, the media, or even a promotion. But throughout all of those interviews and all of those questions, I'll bet there was one that you've never been asked but would have liked to. So, what is that question, and what would have been your answer?
Um, so I thought this was the hardest one to answer, and just because more than anything, I talked to a lot of like college students and grad students and interns, and they're always kind of asking about my career path and how I got to do what I'm doing and what
Hmm.
advice could I give, and so I talk a lot about my kind of biography there. The one thing in terms of that, and obviously like career advice and kind of picking my brain on different professional aspects. The one question that I've never really been asked and is really crucial to knowing me and knowing what has made me who I am in terms of what I do is the question, how did your friendships shape your musical taste? Because I
Hmm.
think a lot of people talk about how parents shaped musical taste, how siblings, how my work shaped my musical taste. And all those things are important. Obviously, I'm very close with both my parents and, have a lot of musical overlap, especially with my dad. Um, but when I look back at why I'm doing what I'm doing, I would say it's because of the experiences I had with my friends growing up and geeking out about different bands and going through different phases where I had a very distinct, I was born in 1987, so when um, the turn of the century happened and it was like TRL and the teeny bopper stuff and also like new metal like Korn and Limp Bizkit. Um, Me and my guy friends were absorbing all of it. Like I went a couple years ago with my high school buddies to see the Backstreet Boys in Las Vegas because we just all grew up with the Backstreet Boys, and
Hmm.
that helped me fall in love with pop music. And then I, got into harder rock with them. And then, in the mid 2000s, I had some totally different group of friends who were really into like Sufjan Stevens and Joanna Newsom and TV on the radio and all of these bands that were not being covered by really anyone. This was kind of when Pitchfork was very much kind of niche. And I just remember like diving so deeply into that world with other people alongside me. And, it's funny because this was a relatively long time ago, and I'm not um, in touch with all those people still. I still have close friends
Hmm.
from those various eras. Um, but that was pivotal to me. And I think that it's always interesting to talk to other writers and editors and people in the music industry about those types of memories in the sense of how the people you grew up with helped you do what you did. Like I have friends who um, groups of friends who are just so into hip hop, and part of it is because they grew up with 8 close friends who all loved every mixtape that came out.
Hmm.
And that's really special. Like that's a special thing. And kind of to the present day, um, I share a lot of that with my wife, who we have a ton of musical overlap, and we are constantly talking about music and listening to music, especially in the car. And um, that's like a thing that I think about a lot in terms of just the relationships I have with the people around me and how I don't think I don't, if those kinds of friendships didn't happen, I don't think I'd be doing what I'm doing.
Hmm.
And so, yeah, no one's ever really asked me about that, but it's really important to me. And I guess if you're listening to this, like, don't, my advice would be like, don't discount the musical bonds between friends because, like, I took my wife and I took our niece, our 13-year-old niece, to see Olivia Rodrigo. Um,
Ah,
and it was really cool. She puts on a great show. It was really fun for my niece, it was her first concert. She had a totally
oh,
great time.
exciting.
But also, like, there were a lot of teenagers there with friends screaming every word into each other's faces, and like I would just say, like, that's something that you're going to remember forever. Like, I remember those very specific instances with my friends. And I think, like, don't discount those memories. Like, don't discount those bonds because, like, whether you get into the music industry or not, like, they're going to be really pivotal, and they're going to be stuff that, like, yeah, you're just always going to take with you.
Absolutely. It's funny that you just mentioned your niece's first concert because as you were like telling me all about this, that's all that I could think about was kind of when I was growing up and what kind of led me to get into the music industry was like going to concerts with my friends. And that's like the one thing that I remember. And I would go to these shows and be like, I love concerts. I
Yeah.
love the feeling of live music. You think about those experiences and you're right, like you were with your friends and that's what shapes you. So that's
Yeah.
great.
Oh yeah. Absolutely.
Well, Jason, it has been wonderful having you on 3Q tonight, and I appreciate you taking the time to chat with me.
Yeah. Thank you for having me. It was great.
Of course. And to all my listeners, I know you enjoyed hearing from Jason as much as I enjoyed speaking with him. So stay tuned for next week's episode of 3Q, where I interview industry professionals for just 15 minutes by asking three powerful questions. See you next time.